Hello grade 12s, welcome to this English home language lesson. Today we will be focusing on cartoons. My name is Marinda Swanepoel and I'm very excited to work with you today and help you on your cartoon skills. Let's get started. When we look at the curriculum scope, visual analysis is where our focus will be today, but there's also reading for meaning and understanding, the summary, and language structures and conventions. Our concept map will focus on cartoons, and the elements we'll look at is revising tools of humor, analyzing how techniques impact the interpretation and the meaning of cartoons, the impact of humor, visual and verbal elements on the message, and of course providing detailed responses. By the end of the lesson, we will address the following: revising tools of humor such as irony, stereotyping, pun, hyperbole, parody, and satire. Analyzing how techniques such as font, size, punctuation, speech bubbles, and frames impact the interpretation of cartoons. Interpreting cartoons and understanding the impact that humor and visual or verbal elements have on the overall message. And of course, providing detailed specific references to the text in your responses. Keywords that you should be aware of during this lesson include frame, attitude, mood, tone, verbal elements. What should you know and what should you be able to do? The use of persuasive techniques like emotive language, persuasion, bias, and manipulative language. You must also know how language and images reflect and shape values and attitudes. Understanding the impact of the use of font types and sizes, captions, speech bubbles, and symbols. Understanding the composition of visual elements to convey meaning, and then analyzing, interpreting, evaluating, and responding to a wide range of cartoons. Common content errors include the following: lack of vocabulary and grammatical knowledge, not understanding the use of humor and tone, misunderstanding tone and sarcasm and a lack of vocabulary, and not linking the visual and verbal elements to the message of the cartoon. Also, not following the requirements of the verbs of questioning. Exam writing competencies that you will apply during this lesson: reading skills, critical thinking, time management skills, information retrieval, communication skills, active learning methods, and vocabulary skills. Now, before we continue with the rest of our lesson, we're going to go for a quick ad break. I'll see you in just a little bit. Welcome back, learners, to this English home language lesson on cartoons. Now let's look at the first element. Firstly, we are going to revise the tools of humor. Content problems include a lack of knowledge of the key terms and not understanding the purpose of the techniques used. The first aspect we'll look at is irony. Irony is a contrast between expectation and reality, or when something is said but the opposite is meant. The purpose is to highlight contradictions or create humorous twists, often to criticize or provoke thought. So our first example over here is an example of situational irony. You can see that this building is on fire, and ironically, it is the fire station that is on fire. Verbal irony can be seen in this image, where the man standing in the rain, clearly not very excited by his facial expression, says, "Oh great, just what I needed today." Verbal irony, he's saying the opposite of what he actually means. Next up, we're going to look at stereotyping. Stereotyping is oversimplified generalizations about a group of people. It is to convey familiar ideas or highlight biases quickly, often for comedic or critical effect. Now, when you look at the example, We see the stereotype of a woman loving to shop. You can see that she's smiling and she feels fantastic. You can see all of the packages. There's a store in the background, and stereotypically, the man is not impressed by the shopping trip. The next aspect is a pun. A pun is a play on words, and it exploits multiple meanings. It adds humor through wordplay, making the viewer think about a double meaning or a hidden joke. So in our example, we have 2 slices of bread on a romantic date in a restaurant, and the one says, "You're my better half." Of course, playing on the idea of you are my better half. The next aspect is hyperbole. That is an exaggeration for emphasis or comedic effect. It is used to create humor or to make a point by presenting situations as more extreme than they really are. If you look at this example, we see a classroom situation. There's the green board, and we can see that the character in the front feels quite overwhelmed by his huge eyes and the sweat droplets on his face. Behind him, we see a mountain of work. Of course, this hyperbole exaggerates the amount of work that he feels he has, and I'm sure that we've all felt that way sometime. The next aspect is parody. A parody is an imitation of style or a person or a genre for comedic effect, and it's normally to mock or comment on the original subject in a humorous or critical way. Our example today is focused on Hamlet. If you study Hamlet as one of your set works, you will understand this. Here we have Hamlet in a modern setting. He has a cell phone, and of course, his famous words, "to be or not to be," are changed to "post or not to post." Satire is used quite often in cartoons, and it is the use of humor or irony or exaggeration to criticize or expose flaws. It's normally to provoke thought or to bring attention to a societal or political issue through wit and humor. The example we have is of a group of people, a scientist presumably looking at his lab coat, and then a crowd in the audience listening to him. He's smiling, and then the setting, you can see that there's a massive factory in the background with a lot of pollution, and in between we see the ice melting and some polar bears. If you look at the humans, they're all smiling and very happy, and of course this satirizes the very critical issue of climate change. The next aspect we're going to look at is analyzing how techniques impact the interpretation and the meaning of cartoons. Content problems include the following: not understanding the function of the techniques, not applying that knowledge to the context given to you in your exam paper, overlooking the shape of frames, bubbles, and other elements, and missing key parts of the cartoon's message. Also, not knowing how language reflects and shapes values and attitudes. The first aspect is the setting. That is where and when the cartoon takes place, and it gives context to the events in the cartoon. Characters, of course, are very simple. They could be caricatures or stereotypes, animals, to convey a certain message. Body language is something that you are very familiar with. Those are the non-verbal cues like body posture, movement, and gestures that communicate mood and attitude. Facial expressions is also something that you're familiar with. These are non-verbal cues like these eye size, the gaze, where the eyes are looking, eyebrow movement, mouth movement that communicate mood and attitude. More elements, movement lines. So movement lines or streaks show action or the speed of an action when a character is running, for example. Then, of course, the dialogue format. You will find dialogue in cartoons. Just be aware that cartoons often use capital letters for dialogue. And just take a look if all the dialogue is used, that is used is in capital letters before you use that as a technique. Then you must also look at font size and punctuation. Fonts can change for emphasis. Important words may be in bold or in a larger font. And then, of course, punctuation can show feelings and emphasize ideas. Symbols in cartoons are visual elements that represent a larger message. Labels can also be found in some cartoons where parts of the drawing that offer hints to help to interpret the cartoon are labeled with a word or two. Then a caricature is an exaggeration of a person's features or actions for effect. And then lastly, we have onomatopoeia, words that mimic sounds like pow or boom, crash, depending on the context, often used with movement line to add humor to indicate these actions. Speech bubbles are very important, and it's also important to know the functions of the different speech bubbles. A solid bubble, like you can see over here, indicates direct speech from a certain character. The second type of speech bubble we will look at today is the dotted speech bubble. Here you can see an example. When there are two or more characters in a frame, a dotted line bubble indicates whispering. If there's only one character, it will indicate focus or concentration. Next, we have the jagged line bubble, and this shows the character's emotional reactions. And of course, you are familiar with a cloud-like bubble. It represents a character's thoughts, and it is called a thought bubble. Now let's look at an example that includes many of these aspects. Here we have a cartoon, and if we take it apart a little bit at a time, we can see a jagged edge speech bubble. We can see the font size and that the font is in bold. We can look at the character and his facial expression, at his body language. His arms are up, showing his muscles. Then there is a symbol. This, of course, you are familiar with. It's the Wi-Fi symbol. We have some onomatopoeia here at the bottom with the word boom and 3 exclamation marks. On the right-hand side, you can see there are movement lines showing the speed and the action. Then the setting and symbol are together under this line. Here is another symbol, and the setting you can see is a city. There is another speech bubble, and look at the difference between this speech bubble and the one by the superhero character. And then we have facial expression in this character at the bottom. She does not seem very happy. She says, "Why is my Wi-Fi slower than a snail?" The superhero says, "Fear not, citizen. I'm here to fix your Wi-Fi connection." He is Mr. Wi-Fi, a superhero that helps us with our Wi-Fi connections. The next aspect we're going to focus on is the impact of humor, visual and verbal elements on the message of the advertisement. Content problems include the following: a limited analysis of visual and verbal elements, not linking visual and verbal elements to the message, not understanding the composition of visual texts to convey the meaning, and not knowing how images reflect and shape values and attitudes. When you're looking at visuals, ask yourself leading questions. What is happening? Look at the main action and how it is shown. Pay attention to the characters' movements and their expressions. Focus on facial expressions. Do they look happy, sad, or frustrated? Look for signs like smiles, frowns, or raised eyebrows. Always look at the body language. Are they standing confidently or slouched? This can show emotions like boredom or excitement. More questions. Look at relationships. How characters stand or move can show you if they are friends or enemies or strangers. Look at the words that are used. What are the characters saying? And look for clues in the speech bubbles. Always take a look at punctuation. Exclamation marks show excitement or anger. The ellipses suggest hesitation or confusion. And then look at the setting. Where and when does this take place? Is it in a city or a school or a fantasy world? This will help you understand the cartoon's message. Also take into consideration the social context. Does the cartoon refer to current events or common stereotypes. Now, before we continue with the rest of our lesson in grade 12s, we're going to go for a quick ad break. I'll see you in just a little bit. Welcome back, grade 12s. Let's continue with our lesson on cartoons and the analysis of cartoons. Now we're going to focus on providing detailed responses. Content problems include the following: not answering what the verbs of questioning require, not analyzing all the elements in a cartoon, failing to refer to specific details from the cartoon, making answers vague and unsupported, and giving responses that are too broad, not addressing the cartoonist's message. This is our example, so let's go and take a look. We have a cartoon. It has 3 frames, as you can see that they are labeled. In the first frame, we see 2 characters, and one character seems quite upset, and there is a speech bubble. She says, "You bought homework online with my credit card." So we can assume that this is a mother. We're continuing to frame 2. That is wrong on so many levels. Look at the exclamation mark. It's cheating, stealing, and it's stupid. You can also see that we have some words in bold text. And the character replies, "And I only got a C+." And then the mother reacts, "Did I mention stupid?" Here you can see stupid is in bold, but it is also underlined, even without my underlining. I can take that away, and you can see that it's underlined, of course, to emphasize. So the boy in the checked shirt is Jeremy. Let's continue to the questions. Question 4.1 says, refer to frame 1. That's very important because that is your textual reference, and that's where the base of your answer must be. Provide one indicator reflecting the mother's anger. Now we look at the frame. There are many indicators, and this doesn't specify whether it should be visual or verbal. So you can look at her facial expressions. Her mouth is wide open. There are some lines there to show the sounds coming out, and of course the bold words. So that is exactly what the answer says. Her mouth is wide open, indicating that she's shouting, and the speech bubble is written in large, bold letters, indicating her anger. Make sure that you don't confuse capital letters. As you can see, the entire cartoon is written in capital letters. Question 4.2, how would Jeremy's tone change if "and I only got a C+ were written in a jagged speech bubble?" So we go to frame 3 and we look at Jeremy's speech. "And I only got a C+." Now that's a normal speech bubble. We know that jagged edge speech bubbles show emotions. And what emotion would it show? That's what the question requires. It would definitely change his tone to being more defensive, annoyed, angry, or irritated. 1 mark, a very simple use of your knowledge of speech bubbles. Then question 4.3, the limit here is frames 3, 2, and 3. With close reference to the verbal cues in these frames, discuss how the mother's reaction escalates. So we have to focus on 2 frames specifically and only on verbal cues. So here we can see in frame 2, that is wrong on so many levels. Exclamation mark, it's cheating, stealing, and it's stupid. And then frame 3, did I mention stupid? And we can clearly see how her anger escalates. The answer in frame 2, very important when you're asked to refer to 2 frames, separate them in your answer. So begin with "in this frame" and specify, and then give your answer. And when you go to the next frame, specify which frame. It helps to structure your answers and to make it clear to the marker. So in frame 2, the mother is angry and listing the reasons why Jeremy's action is wrong, using phrases like "it's cheating and stealing and it's stupid." This shows her growing frustration. And then in frame 3, her anger peaks when she adds, did I mention stupid, which of course is a repetition, repeating and emphasizing her points. So here you would get 3 marks only if the change is discussed. That's why it's easy to split your answers into the 2 frames and you will get your 3 marks. Then for example 4.4, critically discuss how humor is created in the final frame of the cartoon. This is a very important question, grade 12, but you must not only consider the final frame, you must look at the cartoon as a whole. So if we pause for a moment and we go back, look at everything that happens throughout the cartoon. The mother is obviously upset in frame 1. You bought homework online with my credit card. It's a question, but we know that she knows the answer. Jeremy doesn't seem very upset here. He's quite calm. Then in the next frame, it's only the mother. She is the focus. We don't see Jeremy in frame 2. And she has 2 speech bubbles, indicating that she's not even giving him an opportunity to speak. Of course, we've all dealt with parents that are upset, so you must understand this very well. That is wrong on so many levels. It's cheating, stealing, and it's stupid. 3 short sentences, all using exclamation marks. And then in frame 3, Jeremy says, and I only got a C+. Jeremy's focus is not on the wrongdoing of using a credit card without permission to buy homework, which is also unethical. His focus is on the idea that he didn't even get a really good mark. His mother is very upset in frame 3. Did I mention stupid? Now, she's not calling him stupid in a mean way. She's saying that what he did by buying homework, that is very irresponsible. Let's take a look at the answer. So it's quite a lengthy answer, but we will take it bit by bit. So the humor in the final frame comes from Jeremy's casual reaction. That's why you need to take into consideration the entire cartoon. Your focus must be the final frame, but take into consideration. Jeremy is very calm, he's very relaxed. His mother's is extremely angry, and her long explanation in frame 1 and 2. Jeremy downplays the issue by focusing on his mediocre grade. His focus is on his grade and not on the fact that he was dishonest, showing that he doesn't understand the gravity of the situation. The mother's frustration is repeated. Whenever something is repeated, it's for emphasis. Did I mention stupid? This further highlights the comedic contrast between her intense reaction and Jeremy's annoyance about his mediocre grade. The anticlimactic ending of Jeremy stating that he only got a C+ adds to the humor by emphasizing Jeremy's casual attitude, which further angers his mother. Now here you would get 3 marks for a critical discussion. There must be references, be specific, refer to the frames and explain what happens, and then a critical discussion. This part of the lesson has focused on cartoons and revising tools of humor, analyzing how techniques impact the interpretation and the meaning of cartoons. We have gone through the impact of humor and visual and verbal elements on the message, and then providing detailed responses. The first question we will look at is from November 2023, and it's question number 4. Of course, it's a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon. So if you look at the cartoon, in frame 1, we have Calvin saying, you know, I don't think math is a science. I think it's a religion. We have Hobbes, and his reaction is quite confused. He says, a religion? In frame 2, yeah, all these equations are like miracles. You take 2 numbers, and when you add them, they magically become one new number. No one can say how it happens. You either believe it or you don't. Look at Calvin's body language and his facial expression. In frame 3, Calvin continues. He says, this whole book is full of things that have to be accepted on faith. It's a religion with an exclamation mark. In frame 4, we see Hobbes looking at what Calvin is talking about, and in the public schools, no less, call a lawyer. Calvin answers and says, as a math atheist, I should be excused from this. There's also a note that says, Calvin is the young boy and Hobbes is the tiger. Let's look at question 4.1. Refer to frame 1, that is our textual reference. Provide one indicator reflecting Hobbes' confusion. So they tell you that Hobbes is confused. You must just prove it by giving one indicator. So here we can see he's scratching his head, and there's also a question mark in the speech bubble. Question 4.2. How would Hobbes' tone change if a religion were to be written in a jagged speech bubble? So this is still in frame 1, so if the speech bubble changed to one that has jagged lines around it, how would it change the tone? So you take your knowledge of speech bubbles and their techniques used and you apply it to this question. It would indicate that he is either shocked or flabbergasted, surprised by Calvin's suggestion. So the change in tone is very important here for 2 marks. Question 4.3 says refer to frames 1 and 3. So go to both of those frames with close reference to the verbal cues, so the written words. In these frames, discuss the change in Calvin's viewpoint. So now we're not focusing on any visual elements, we're only looking at the verbal cues. In frame 1, Calvin says, you know, I don't think math is a science, I think it's a religion. And then in frame 3, he says, this whole book is full of things that have to be accepted on faith. It's a religion. So we're looking for the change of viewpoint. Clearly, here he says, I think it's a religion. In frame 3, he says, it is a religion. Let's look at the answer. Remember, when you have to refer to different frames, make sure that you are very specific. Start your answer with, in this frame. Explain, and then when you go to the next one, also give a frame reference. It structures your answer, and it also helps the marker. So in frame 1, Calvin tentatively proposes his theory to Hobbes that math is a religion. He says, I think. In frame 3, Calvin is convinced by his own argument. He asserts, he concludes his argument with an affirmative. It is a religion. And this is further emphasized, of course, by the exclamation mark at the end. Here you would get 3 marks, 1 mark for the 1 frame, 1 mark for frame 3, and then 1 mark for the comment. Question 4.4 says, critically discuss, so that is our verb of questioning, how humor is created in the final frame. So even though the focus is on the final frame, you have to take into consideration all the other frames in coming to this conclusion. So we're looking for humor, and in public schools, no less, call a lawyer. That's what Hobbes says, and then Calvin says, as a math atheist, I should be excused from this. So Hobbes is obviously a little sarcastic, but Calvin doesn't pick up on that. So question 4.4, the answer says, Hobbes is being sarcastic when he says, call a lawyer. Calvin's real reason, so this is where we get into how the humor is developed. His real reason for his dramatic argument becomes apparent. He simply does not want to study math. We can all relate to that. Here you can see a slash, so this is another possible option for the answer. Hobbes reminds Calvin of the legal responsibilities of public schools to ensure religious freedom. Calvin believes that the same rights that are assigned to people who reject religious practices should be afforded to him in order to reject math. Calvin's oversimplified arguments, corroborated by Hobbes, culminate in a humorous conclusion. Whenever you discuss humor, start by summarizing what is happening. That will guide you to where the point of humor is. So here, 3 marks only if there is a critical discussion included of the humour. Now, before we continue with the rest of our lesson, we're going to go for a quick ad break, and I'll see you in just a little while. Welcome back, grade 12s. Let's continue with our lesson on cartoons and how to analyze them. The next question we're going to use is the May-June paper 1, and this is question 4. We have a Peanuts cartoon featuring good old Charlie Brown. A note on the side, the boy is Charlie Brown and the girl's name is Lucy. In frame 1, we see Charlie Brown sitting at a desk writing something. In frame 2, you can see him putting on his jacket or his coat, about to go out of the door, and he has a piece of paper in his mouth. Then in frame 3, he sees Lucy, and he says to her, "You're going to be proud of me, Lucy. I've decided that this next year is going to be my year of decision." If you look at his facial expression, he's smiling, he's walking quite happily towards Lucy. There's also an exclamation mark. This is the list of things in my life that I'm going to correct. I'm going to be a better person. Look at Charlie Brown. He's smiling, he's quite happy with himself, and he's holding up the list that he has created. Then in frame 5, Lucy starts speaking. Now she says, "Not me. I am going to spend this whole year regretting the past. It's the only way, Charlie Brown." Look at her arms outstretched. Look at the worried facial expression. In frame 6, she says, "I am going to cry over spilt milk and sigh over lost loves." The mouth is downturned, her arms are up, and poor Charlie Brown doesn't know what to say. In frame 7, "It's a lot easier. It's too hard to improve. I tried it once. It drove me crazy." So she's standing with her arms at her side, the mouth is still turned down, and Charlie Brown, his smile is gone. It's also now just a straight line holding the list, and he's looking at the list. In frame 8, Lucy says, "Forget the future is my motto, regret the past. Oh, how I regret the past." There, of course, we have "oh" showing emotion a lot. We have another exclamation mark, and Lucy's hands are over her face, covering her eyes. Then in frame 9, "Why did I do this? Why did I do that? Why I regret it all." Lucy is being very dramatic, and poor Charlie Brown doesn't know what to do. In the final frame, "Oh, what regrets, what remorse, what anguish, what..." And we see Charlie Brown sighing. His mouth is downturned, he looks quite worried, and he throws away the list that he has created. Now let's look at the questions. Question 4.1. Explain how Charlie Brown's mood is conveyed in frame 3. So there are no limits on verbal or visual elements, so you can refer to any of those for 2 marks. Of course, he's walking, we can see that in the movement, he's smiling, and then he also says, "You're going to be proud of me, Lucy. I've decided that this next year is going to be my year of decision." The answer, he is happy, he's self-assured, he's excited. That is the mood. And then how is it shown? His jaunty step, his beaming smile, his desire to change, the outstretched arm showing the notes, or even the spoken words, "proud of me, my year of decision." In this question, you will get 1 mark for the mood and 1 mark for the explanation, the reference that you give to the cartoon. Then question 4.2 says, refer to frames 4 to 6, so that includes frame 5 as well. Discuss is my verb of questioning both characters' viewpoints with reference to the cartoonist's depiction of them. How the cartoonist shows them and how does that show us their viewpoints. So again, we've looked at this frame This is my list of things in my life that I'm going to correct. I'm going to be a better person. He's smiling. And then frame 5, Lucy starts speaking, not me. I'm going to spend this whole year regretting the past. It's the only way, Charlie Brown. I'm going to cry over spilt milk and sigh over lost loves. Lucy seems very upset, and here Charlie Brown seems quite perplexed by her reaction. So very specifically, refer to those frames when you're answering. Charlie Brown's viewpoint is that he's committed to being a better and more decisive person. This is shown by his self-satisfied smile and his bold stance. His body language shows confidence. So the cartoonist places him in a frame of his own. Lucy, by contrast, has chosen to wallow in self-pity and regret. This is indicated by her despairing look, her outstretched arms in frame 5. This decision is further highlighted in frame 6 by her downturned mouth and her folded arms. And of course, her verbal retort, I'm going to cry over spilt milk, reinforces this view. 3 marks here, only if a reference is made to the viewpoints and depiction of both of these characters. Make sure you answer all parts of the question, grade 12s. Then question 4.3, comment critically, that is my verb of questioning, on the effectiveness of frame 10 in the cartoon in the context of the cartoon. So frame 10, Lucy says, oh, what regrets, what remorse, what anguish, what, and there's the ellipsis, and Charlie Brown sighs and throws his list away. So is this effective? Despite Charlie's initial optimism in the introductory frame, so refer to the whole cartoon but focus on the frame that they give, in frame 10, he abandons his decision to be a better person after being defeated by Lucy's fatalistic attitude. Charlie is unable to convince himself or Lucy by the end of the cartoon. His weakness adds to the anticlimax of the final frame. Or there's another option. Charlie asks for validation from Lucy in frame 3. He thinks that she will be proud of him. But this is sidelined by Lucy's dominant and opinionated or self-absorbed personality. This leads to the ironic conclusion that Charlie Brown becomes a victim of his own question and he discards the paper in defeat. So here, 3 marks only if a critical comment is made. The next cartoon comes from November 2022 and it's question 4. We have a Madam and Eve cartoon, which I'm sure you're familiar with, grade 12s. In frame 1, we have Thandi and she says, I really hated last week's load shedding. You can see there's some bold words. I couldn't watch TV. I couldn't recharge my phone. I couldn't play games, text my friends, or use Snapchat and Instagram. Then we have Mother Anderson. She's sitting in a chair reading a newspaper and she says, I feel your pain. In frame 2, Thandi says, what if it happens again? Look at the punctuation, grade 12s. How am I supposed to amuse myself for 4 whole hours? Look at Thandi's facial expression. Look at Mother Anderson's facial expression. She doesn't seem quite impressed. And then she suggests, what about doing what I did at your age? Use your own imagination. Thandi is very shocked by this. She says, my imagination, question mark and 2 exclamation marks. In frame 4, are you crazy? I haven't used that in years. All the parts are rusted. Now look at the eyes on Mother Anderson. She's quite shocked. In frame 5, I'm too used to apps supplying passive brain stimulation created by large entertainment conglomerates, so I don't have to use my imagination. Using your imagination is like riding a bike. It'll come back. Like riding a bike, you can see more bold font, question mark, exclamation mark. In frame 7, who rides a bike these days? I play Motor Racer on Android. And Mother Anderson replies, just give it a try. In frame 8, Okay, fine, I'll try. Another ellipsis and then some onomatopoeia, and gasp. Thandi seems quite upset if we look at her body language, and there are also some action lines. Anything coming yet? Nope. Wait. Yes, it's working. I've rebooted my imagination. Look at how Thandi is depicted, grade 12. And Mother Anderson replies, good. What are you imagining? Thandi replies, that I'm playing Candy Crush and I'm winning. Mother Anderson ends with a thought bubble. You can see it here. It's hopeless. Now, let's look at the questions. What does Mother Anderson's body language convey about her attitude? So body language and attitude, that is the focus. She remains seated with the newspaper in front of her face. And what does that tell us? She's disinterested or uninterested, nonchalant or dismissive of Thandi's ordeal. 1 mark for the reference and 1 mark for the attitude. Then 4.2, refer to frames 3 and 5. Both frames, grade 12. Comment on is my verb of questioning, Thandi's responses to Mother Anderson. So it's the idea that she's shocked about using her imagination. So in frame 3, be very specific in your answer. Thandi is surprised or even outraged when Mother Anderson suggests that she use her imagination. Then in frame 5, she asserts that she does not need to use her imagination because she uses apps designed by large conglomerates or companies, and Thandi is oblivious to the power of the imagination, preferring the conditioning of the entertainment app. So 3 marks only if a comment is made. You can see there's a reference, and there is a comment. Then question 4.3, discuss how humor is created in frame 10 in the context of the whole cartoon. So again, your focus should be frame 10, but you must also take into consideration the entire cartoon. That I'm playing Candy Crush and I'm winning, and then of course it's hopeless. The humor here is conveyed when Mother Anderson thinks that she's convinced Thandi to use her imagination, only to find in the last frame that ironically Thandi's imagination is being used to cope with her technology addiction. She imagines playing a game on her phone instead of actually playing a game. Mother Anderson appears defeated. She says it's hopeless. She returns to her position behind the newspaper without any verbal engagement when she realizes that it is too difficult to change Thandi's mindset. So here, credit responses that make reference to the anticlimax or bathos. That's just the idea that there is no real solution to the problem. The next example we're going to look at today is from the May-June 2022 question paper, and of course it's question 4. We have a frame with a building and it says, you've got to stop condescending to the customers. Whatever do you mean? In frame 2, we see the 2 characters who are speaking. You abuse them for not recycling, for eating high fructose sugar, and for watching reality TV shows. The smaller character says, hardly. In frame 3, the focus is solely on the smaller character, and he says, I absolutely understand that some people who have not been blessed with a high level of education and information make foolish decisions. It's not their fault. In frame 4, the taller character in the black shirt says, condescending. You can see it's in large font with an exclamation mark and bold printed. And the smaller character says, good use of a big word. Let's jump into the first question. So 4.1 refer to frames 1 and frame 2. How does the dialogue reflect the 2 characters' attitude towards their customers? The smaller of the 2 characters is dismissive. He's condescending, whereas the character in the black t-shirt is concerned about his customers. Now, condescending, of course, means to look down on others, to think that you are better. 4.2, refer to frames 3 and frame 4. Comment on the effectiveness of one technique used by the cartoonist. It's not specified, so it can be any technique. So in frame 2, frame 3, we have I absolutely understand that some people who have not been blessed with a high level of education and information make foolish decisions. It's not their fault. We can look at the visual. The focus is completely on this character. And then, of course, in frame 4, the shouting of this character, big open mouth, large bold letters in a larger print, also the squiggly speech bubble and exclamation mark. And now we look at the smaller character. He replies, good use of a big word. Let's look at the answer. So one technique is layout. In frame 3, the cartoonist uses that to depict the smaller character man's arrogance, focusing on him alone, showing his large ego. There's also irony. The smaller man denies making demeaning comments and subsequently belittles his customers. Facial expressions and body language, bold font are also used. In frame 4, the facial expression of the man in the black t-shirt is one of outrage, as indicated by the bold font, his wide open mouth, and the jagged speech bubble. The smaller man nonchalantly or dispassionately drinks his coffee and further insults his employee. And of course, there is the anticlimax. Despite the outrage of the man in black, the smaller man is apathetic. He just doesn't care and derisive. He still thinks that he is better than everyone else. So here, 1 mark for the identification of the technique and 1 mark for the effectiveness. Now, before we continue with the rest of our lesson, we're going to go to a quick ad break. I will see you in just a little bit. Welcome back, learners, to this lesson on cartoons. Today, our focus has been on the visual analysis under reading and viewing. More specifically, our focus has been on cartoons. We've revised tools of humor, analyzing how techniques impact the interpretation and the meaning of cartoons, and the impact of humor and visual and verbal elements on the message, and then, of course, providing detailed responses. Keywords that you should always keep in mind when you're doing cartoons include frame, attitude, mood, tone, verbal elements. And then common content errors and misconceptions include the following: a lack of vocabulary and grammatical knowledge, not understanding the use of humor and tone, misunderstanding tone and sarcasm, and also a lack of vocabulary, not linking visual and verbal elements to the message, and not following the requirements of the verbs of questioning. Exam writing competencies that you should always keep in your pocket: your reading skills, critical thinking skills, time management skills, information retrieval skills, communication skills, active learning methods, and your vocabulary skills. I've added some extra practice questions for you grade 12s. You can go and look at all of these questions, practice them, make sure you give specific answers that give references to the text. For now, that is all the time we have, and I hope that this has helped you and that you can take this information and these skills into your next exam and that it will help you be successful. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to see you soon.